Good evening, everyone. We have some still coming in. I'd like to welcome you all to our second community meeting of the 24-25 school year for Williston Basin School District number 7. I'm Paula Langford. I'm the Director of Public Relations. And I'm going to do a few introductions before we move forward with the first presentation. So tonight's presentation, or community meeting rather, is kind of co-sponsored by the school board and the district administration. And so we have a few folks here today. We did have to kind of work with dates that would work for the most people, so we have some board members who weren't able to be in attendance and some district administration not in attendance. So the district administration, just kind of wave your hand. Yeah, they're right over there. So we have Dr. Fadley and our assistant superintendents here. I want to particularly call attention to our school board members who are present, and if there are particular questions that are submitted during the presentation, they would come up and answer. Otherwise, they'll be available, as well as district administration, to answer questions and just talk about the various topics after the presentations today. So we have Mr. Corey Swint, and he is our Vice President. We have Mr. Chris Junt. We have Heather Wheeler and Chris Walstead. There may be others coming, I'm not sure, but that's who we have. So that is that piece, what we're going to do for a presentation. If you could put, please, Casey, our presentation back up on the board. We're going to have first a presentation from Senator Brad Bekkedahl. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We really appreciate it. And he will be talking about Measure 4. And then there'll be the elementary school presentation that will primarily be Nick Lippert of JLG Architects, providing an overview and an update with regard to that. In the meantime, this particular QR code, who likes to use them? Don't raise your hand. I know that you're all a little like, do we have to? If you didn't submit any questions ahead of time, which I'm assuming that you didn't because we didn't get any questions submitted, you can still submit them during the presentation. Please submit your questions digitally. We aren't going to be handing the mic around because things kind of tend to get taking a little bit longer and get off task when we do that. So that would be the way we prefer that you submit your questions or comments that we can read aloud or answer here. Also at that QR code, all on that page, are the 2 PowerPoint presentations that will be used by Senator Bekkedahl, and with regard to the new elementary school, Nick Lippert referring to that. And also you can then also click back to the community meetings page on our website. Anything else on the front end that I missed? Okay. Well, without further ado, I would like to introduce Senator Brad Bekkedahl to talk on Measure 4.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks everybody for being here tonight, and thanks for the invitation. I'll preface this by first saying I'm not here representing the legislature of North Dakota. I'm here presenting the facts as an appropriations member within that chamber. And some of this you could interpret as my personal opinions, but some of it you will also see numbers that are factual, and I'm hoping to get that information out to everybody. What I really would like to see is that everybody that gets to vote on this measure is an informed voter and not an uninformed voter. So I'm going to give you some numbers in these PowerPoint slides. So if you want to start, this is a constitutional measure, and there's 2 ways you can get measures on the ballot in North Dakota. One is an initiated measure by the public, which is statutory. That means it's written into law and it can be adjusted by the legislature to make sure it conforms with Century Code. Constitutional measures cannot be adjusted by the legislature. Once they're put in the Constitution, we all live with whatever is written into the Constitution at that point. Some of us have issues with constitutional measures in that the Constitution of our state is a founding document and should be very protected to change, and ours is not very protected to change. It only takes 50% to change our Constitution. Most states, it'll take 50% for a statutory initiated measure, but a 60 or even a 2/3 for the public for any constitutional changes. So but we live with what we have. It gives great power to the public, and I don't take that away from them. Next slide, please. So this is the history of the property tax. In 1889, our Constitution was presented, and it said, laws shall be passed taxing by uniform rule all property according to its true value in money. So that's where we start from in 1889. In 1914, there was an enactment that says taxes shall be uniform within the same class of property. We have 4 classes of property for taxation in North Dakota. We have ag property, we have commercial property, we have centrally assessed property, and we have residential property. Centrally assessed is very confusing, but centrally assessed is really large industrial plant facilities such as BNSF Railroad, One Oak Pipeline Systems, transmission lines with Basin Electric, and they're property taxed in lieu of within the state, but there's formulas where they pay those property taxes. The residential, obviously we know what that is. Commercial, we know what that is. And then the ag base, we know what that is as well. Interestingly, what I'll point out as I go along here is that of those 4 classifications, 3 of them are income producing classifications. You make money on commercial property, you make money on the centrally assessed property, and you can or should make money on your ag property depending on the year and what you have to plant. So, but anyway, the residential is the only one that is not classified as an income producing property. Next slide, please. So these are, I'm not going to go through all of this, but these are the 4 classifications I talked about. Equalized assessments across the state. Ag land was changed from a market value to a production formula. So NDSU came out with a system where they can actually test the soils on your property and give you a soil assessment, and you are then taxed on the value of the productivity of the land, which I think is a pretty fair system. I don't know, you farmers might have a different view, but I think that's pretty fair. What it means is you're probably going to pay less on that productivity index for taxes in Williams County than you would in Cass County, where the land is much thicker. It preserved the levy authority based on taxing authority levels of political subdivisions, and it gradually brought taxable value of centrally assessed property. If I have one complaint about the 4 classifications, from what I've seen, is the centrally assessed properties tend to be more protected from valuation increases. I don't know why that is. I haven't figured it out yet, but they seem to be pretty static at a valuation of, or a taxable amount of about $100 million a year, or $100 million a biennium, excuse me. Again, I don't know why that is that way, but it is. So, next slide, please. In 1981, this is really confusing. Go to the next slide if you can, please. Okay, here's what we have. So you have a true and full market value of your house. Now, everybody complains about the assessors and what they do, but to be real honest with you, I sat on the Finance and Tax Committee as vice chair for 4 years before I got into appropriations, and I learned this system very well. And the state gives guidance or guidelines and training to the assessors in the counties and the cities throughout the state. And the assessors then in the local jurisdictions go out and assess the property. And what they do is they look at all the properties. They're supposed to do this every year, and I believe Lindsay, Williams County, we're one of the few that do it every year, right? I think we're very good at this. And what keeps it, what that does is it keeps a level playing field from year to year, so you don't have huge jumps up and down in your valuations. But they go out and assess the properties. My house, for example, is a 1953 small ranch house, 824 square feet, and I've finished the basement. So they're going to give me an assessment value within the classification of property where all the other ones that are built in the early 50s, about that same size, about that same style, and they're going to look at the sales of those properties during that year. And then they will use those sales to comparably value my property based on a similar classification. And there are a lot of classifications in residential between old and new and styles and where they're located. So I think it's as about a fair system as you can get to make sure that everybody has an assessment tied to the real value of their property. Interestingly, in the equalization hearings that we do at the city every year in April, we have some people come in and don't think their valuations are correct. And when we ask them what they paid for the property, the answer is usually, well, I paid too much. So that tells me right away that they probably paid more for the property than even the valuations are. So I think it's pretty fair. Anyway, the assessed value, true market value, we take a 50% number of that for the assessed value. Then the assessed value is taken times 10% for non-residential, that's centrally assessed, commercial and the ag property, or excuse me, yeah, ag property. And then the assessed value is 9% for residential. So you take that times the number of mills, which is a division by 1,000, and you end up with a $250,000 home in this example. 50% times 9%. Do the calculation, then the taxes at 100 mills would be $1,125. The important thing about this slide is just to remember that residential property is only 9% classification value here, and everything else is 10%. Next slide. So the elimination of property tax, and this is just to try and understand what's on the ballot. Next slide, please. So here's the sections you have to be aware of. Number one, it would prohibit political subdivisions, and those are, if you don't know, they're counties, cities, park districts, townships, any local board, library boards, any local board that has taxing authority in the Century Code is a political subdivision. So they would no longer be levying any tax on the assessed value of real or personal property starting January 1st of 25. The exception is, and this is important because I don't think some people realize that if this passes, you're still going to get a property tax statement if you have either special assessments currently on your property or any bonded indebtedness from your city, county, or your school district. So the exception is any bonded indebtedness that occurred before 30 days following the date of this amendment, if approved by the voters, would be responsible of the people in the political sub until the debt is paid. So you are going to get a tax statement. I think we had the bond issue, $35 million. That will continue to be paid by property taxes. I don't think we have many special assessments out there. We tend to stay away from those as a city, but there may be some out there, and other examples I'm not aware of. Number 3, requires the state of North Dakota to provide replacement payments to political subdivisions in no less than the tax levied on real property during the 2024 calendar year. That's this year. We're all doing budgets right now and getting budgets approved. Ours will be tomorrow night at City Hall for the city. I think the county, did you do yours already, Lindsay? Okay, yours is done. Schools? October 7th for schools. I don't know when. Parks doesn't have any taxes in Williston because of the sales tax. So, but here's the important part. You're going to see numbers on here that are already outdated because the initial calculation estimate by a legislative council, which is a nonpartisan, non-political entity in Bismarck that does these things for us, for the legislature, so we have information. They first came up with about a $2.6 billion cost for this measure if it passes for the next 2 years. Since then, and that was based on the numbers from 2022 tax year, what everybody had paid in taxes, so it's a couple years old. Since then, the tax commissioner said, well, it's not on taxes paid during 2024, it's on taxes levied. Those levies are just now being passed. We won't know the numbers that the levies are requesting until either December or even January of next year, based on whenever the counties get the information out to the tax commissioner to get it to us. So there's some timeline there. So the new number that the tax commissioner came out to us with is $3.15 billion for the biennium, not 2.6. So it's a different number. Go ahead, please. Number 4, political subdivisions debt limit is calculated using true and full value instead of using assessed value. So the true and full value is the larger number. The assessed is the 50% of the true and full value. Currently in statute, you cannot have indebtedness in a political subdivision more than 5% of your full and true value. So this measure just says we're going to use the assessed value, which is 2.5%. It'll still be the same number. It's just using a different term. So I believe the number that you can use now is going to be 2.5% instead of 5%. 2.5% of the assessed value versus 5% of full and true value, but the dollars will be the same. Prohibits a political subdivision from issuing general obligation bonds secured by a tax after January 1st. So we're not able, if this passes, we're not going to be able to get the money in property tax that we levied this fall out of the county distribution system from the taxpayers. Correct, Lindsay? It'll come from the state. Okay, that's how it'll work, I think so. And number 6, a political subdivision incurring indebtedness must provide annual revenues to pay the debt payment when due. So if you have, let's just say the city needed to replace a street, and it had a special assessment component to it. We couldn't replace the street anymore without having property taxes. We'd have to find the other monies to do that. And that's where some of the intricacies of this is going to come into play. Next, please. So tax relief, here's the number I said, $2.536 billion. That was the number from our legislative council. The new one is $3.15 billion. In tax reform, no longer will property taxes calculated on assessed valuation of property, except to pay off existing bond and debt. Go ahead. Ad valorem tax, this is the term that is used to define property tax. It's based on the value of a transaction or of a property. And in lieu of property tax, which we all get here, by the way, we get in lieu of property taxes to the school from the gross production tax formula. We get it from the city, gross production tax. In lieu of property tax is a payment paid in place of property taxes to compensate a government for some or all of the property tax revenue lost due to tax-exempt ownership or use of real property. And why that's important for us is that in 1953, oil was discovered in Williams County on April 4th of 1951. And in 1953, the legislature, Williams County had been taxing the well sites of the oil companies for property taxes to maintain the roads and systems for those well pads to exist. And the legislature took away that authority. It's the only time they've taken away the authority for property tax levy is for the oil industry and for coal industry. So the minerals development were exempted, and the state said, we're going to put other taxes in place, and we will pay the counties for the road developments and the impacts of the industry and in lieu of property tax. And that's what the gross production tax is. So that's very important as we go on. Next, please. So these are some of the taxes that will not be addressed in the measure. So these will continue to be addressed. Telecommunication carriers like Verizon and those, the towers, there's like $8.4 million from that distribution. Rural electric cooperatives pay in lieu of property tax on generation, distribution, and transmission. They're exempted. The coal conversion facilities, they pay a severance tax on coal because some of them don't use North Dakota coal. They have it trucked or railed in from Wyoming. And then tourism or concession license fees at state parks is deposited in the county general fund where collected. I did not know that. I didn't know that we were getting fees from the state park at Lewis and Clark. So, next, please. Here's another one. The oil and gas production tax formula that sends dollars. That is estimated to be $682 million to Western North Dakota this biennium. That's what we get. It gets distributed to counties, cities, and townships. Those three entities. Right now, we're ahead of that. We're probably going to see closer to $900 million distributed out of that because oil has been priced higher than we forecasted, and the production's been higher than we forecasted. Public domain mineral royalties from federal lands within a county. We don't really see that here, but Montreal County gets a big chunk of those. Dunn County gets a big chunk, and so does McKenzie County because they have more federal land than we do. The Bankhead Jones Farm Tenant Act is those are payments that go 50% to the state and 50% to the political subdivisions, and those are millions of dollars that go to Montreal County, Dunn County, and McKenzie County every year, and that's because they have farmland that the federal government took over in the 30s, and they're repaying some taxes for that. And then flood control funds from the Corps of Engineers and U.S. Fish and Wildlife for acquired land to political subs. They don't pay any taxes. They never have. So one exception we always say in the legislature, well, North Dakota, why are we playing the game of property taxes when we don't levy any? Well, we actually do. We levy 1 mil statewide for the University of North Dakota Medical School. And I've tried to get this changed so we can truly not be levying any property tax at the state level, but this is written into the Constitution. So it would require a constitutional measure, vote of the public to rescind it, and then the legislature to replenish the funds out of other sources to the university school. North Dakota state budget, I'll go ahead. So this is the forecast that we had for 2024. We forecasted $70 a barrel for oil at 1.1 million barrels a day, and in the second year of the biennium, which we're currently in now, we had taken that forecast down to $62 a barrel and 1.1 million barrels a day. These numbers come from three sources. S&P Global Rating Agency brings us their forecasts internationally to the legislature. Moody's Analytics, another rating agency, brings their forecast to the governor's office. And then we sit down with a revenue committee made up of members of the North Dakota Petroleum Council, the oil industry, the coal industry, experts in their fields, gas pipelines, midstream companies, and we sit down with them and say, what makes sense to you? Typically, we take the numbers from Moody's and S&P Global and split them down the middle, because one will always be higher and one will always be lower. And then we adjust it accordingly to revenue forecasts from our local people here that know the industry better. So they were all telling us that in 2025 that we were going to see a decline in oil prices because the recovery wasn't happening as quickly as they thought, and they thought that the OPEC countries would continue to oversupply the market. It hasn't happened yet. We're still above $70 a barrel for oil. That's a WTI price. North Dakota, we take we take about a $7 or $8 discount from the WTI price. So if WTI is at 70, we're going to see $62 to $63 a barrel North Dakota price. So we're probably going to be close. Total oil forecast was $5.14 billion for this biennium, which is about 55% of the total revenue that the North Dakota takes in a 2-year period. So you can see that oil feeds the whole system. $5.14 billion, that number is actually going to be closer to $6 billion by the time we end the biennium by my estimates. And again, we're like many of the political subdivisions in the room tonight, we're conservative budgeters. We like to conservatively estimate our revenues and maybe to some degree overestimate our expenditures, and that's how we balance the budgets. That'll become important later on as I go through some other numbers. The slide is pretty self-explanatory. These 17 counties are the ones that are going to fund property tax for the rest of the state, because property tax elimination will mean the state's going to have to dip even further into oil tax revenue streams or even oil tax revenue funds that are put in other funds right now. So I think that's important for people to realize. You're going to be paying all the taxes for Fargo and Grand Forks out of money that's coming out of primarily the counties of Williams, McKenzie, Montreal, and Dunn, because they are about 95% of the state oil production right now. Tax revenues to constitutional funds. So we have 2 streams of taxes in oil and gas. We have a gross production tax instituted in 1953, and we have an extraction tax, which was passed by a measure of the public, I believe, in 1986. And they have different funding priorities within those 2 streams. The extraction tax was first a measure passed by the public by the education facilities within the state that wanted more money for education at that time. When they passed the measure, the industry said, if you tax us too high, we're going to leave. And 6 months after the measure passed, there were 0 rigs drilling in North Dakota for the first time since 1953. So the industry did send a message there. Since then, that extraction tax has bounced up and down, and it's currently at 5%, along with the gross production tax. So a total tax on the industry of 10%. But the legacy fund gets 30% of both of those streams. The first 30% of extraction tax and the first 30% of the gross production tax goes into that legacy fund. And remember, the legacy fund was established by a vote of the public in 2010. It was a measure in 2010, constitutional measure again. And the public said, we want you to save oil money, much like the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Norway has done with their oil money, so that when oil goes away, we have money in the bank that we can draw interest off to replace the revenues we were getting from oil. Because oil is a finite resource, and we all know at some point it's going to be gone. So the public passed that measure, and we get 30%. $1.34 billion was the estimate for this biennium. We will see closer to $2 billion into that fund, new money this biennium, because oil's done better than we thought. Common Schools Trust Fund. The Common Schools Trust Fund was established at statehood from the government as one of the founding documents of North Dakota. And the Common Schools Trust Fund, when they set up the state, from the feds to the state, there was within each township in the state established 2 school sections, Section 16 and Section 36. The Common Schools Trust Fund gets revenue from any leases on that land, any sale of the property, or any royalty interest from coal, oil, or gas. And the Common Schools Trust Fund also gets 5% of this the extraction tax stream, not the gross production tax, the extraction tax stream. So they're going to get about $220 million this biennium just from that tax. The Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund is another measure set up by the public. When we get into revenue decline situations at the state statutes require the state to reduce all budgets equally, every agency budget equally. So what would happen is the schools would be spending money on their budgets, and all of a sudden the midstream, the state would say, we're only going to give you X amount because we have an allocation issue. So the public set up the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund funded from this tax, and that money is set aside in the bank so that if we go into a revenue shortfall, there's a place to go and pull out the money to keep the schools whole so the schools don't lose money in their funding. Resources Trust Fund, this is the water projects across the state. We fund water projects statewide, we fund flood control projects statewide. City of Williston, we get 60% grants for our water pipelines and our sewer pipelines that we put underground under this program, so it saves us a lot of money. Kind of another property tax relief in my mind, but that will get almost $450 million. And then the total constitutional funds you see at $2.23 billion. Next slide, please. This is the in lieu of property tax going back, and this is our gross production tax. Again, this is not part of the extraction tax side, the 5%. This is the 5% gross production tax side. So the counties get 54% of that money, or $370 million. Cities get 33%, or $222 million. Schools get 10% at $68.5 million. And townships get 3% at $24.1 million. So that's the 682. Again, we'll see more than that. The issue with school districts, which we have fought since this change occurred in 2003. I was on the Oil and Gas Counties Board at the time. And the school district, Williston, had filed an equity lawsuit with the state over funding. And when that happened, the state had to go into a formula recalculation to make the formula distributions equitable between property poor districts and property rich districts. And when they did that, they saw oil money as a way to get more revenue to fund everybody else. And they wanted to take 100% of our gross production tax that used to go all to the schools in western North Dakota, and they wanted to redistribute that statewide. We fought very hard to try and get it at 50%. We compromised at 75 the state gets and 25 that the school districts get. So what really challenged us at that time in that negotiation was the two largest school districts out west were Dickinson and Williston. And both of the superintendents at those school districts at the time said, we're going to get more money from equity than we would from oil and gas, so you can take 100% at the state, just give us the equity. So that challenged us politically to try and make that happen when our two largest school districts were saying, go ahead and give them 100%. But we kept 25. And the distribution, when it happens to the school districts, in 24, you'll get your check. And then the next year, they'll claw back 75% of that check. So you continue to keep 25%. But what really hurt was when there was a recalculation of those formulas. I think it was in probably 6 years ago. Maybe some of you were on a school board then at that time. But when there was a recalculation done, the school district in Williston, I'm just giving you rough numbers, they got $3 million, and because we didn't hold the school district harmless in this recalculation, the state the next year came in and took back $4 million. So you ended up losing $1 million out of your normal budget just because of that. And at the time, none of us thought that would happen or saw that happening. It only happened after the legislature had adjourned and the agency, DPI, looked at it and said, here's how we're going to interpret this, and they took the money away. So we tried to get that back. It never happened, but net negative of $1 million to Williston schools that year. Next slide, please. Oil and gas, these are small, we call them buckets at the state level that fill incrementally in an order. So what happens is oil and gas tax money comes in, and it'll fill these buckets in a line. So if the Oil and Gas Research Fund gets $17.5 million, and once that bucket fills, then it'll trip into the next budget, State Energy Research Fund, then the next budget, Reclamation Abandoned Well Fund, and then Outdoor Heritage Fund. And all these buckets, by the way, will fill this session. Some sessions they don't. Some sessions there's not enough oil and gas money to fill them all. But important to point out, the Oil and Gas Research Fund and State Energy Research Fund are dollars that flow to the University of North Dakota for their Energy Research Center. And they're the dollars in research that enabled the Bakken development to go from 1% recovery in the Bakken Formation to now about 10% recovery. So we're spending tens of millions of dollars to get back basically billions. So it's a pretty good trade-off. Outdoor Heritage Fund is basically for hunting lands, and State Disaster Fund. When there's tornadoes or floods or other events that the state has to match federal monies to help mitigate the damage, that's where we get the money from. Next slide. These are the large oil fund buckets. So the state general fund, when I say we're going to get about $6 billion in oil taxes, that doesn't all go to the state. We take a planned appropriation of $460 million of that $6 billion and plant it into the general fund to help run state government. The next bucket is tax relief fund, social services. I actually sponsored the legislation in 2017 and 2019 that made this happen. We had a bucket that was $200 million at the time, and it was undedicated. It was just for tax relief. Well, the counties, the state's been paying all the bills for social services along with Medicaid and the federal government, but we never paid for the administration of those services. The counties were levying taxes, property taxes, up to 20 mills to hire the administrative staff and operate them within the counties. So what we did is we took this bucket, which is now $250 million, we've increased the allocation in there. We took this bucket and said, counties, you can no longer levy up to this 20 mils. So we took that 20 mil levy off the books, another property tax issue in my mind. So you take that off, and you can't be taxed anymore in property for that. But we're gonna pay the money to administer this, and the counties still have them as employees within their system, and we just funnel the money from the state, this fund, to fund administration of social services. Public employees retirement, our employment retirement fund, PERS as it's called, in the 2008 and 2009 financial meltdown, lost over half of its value. Because that was a defined benefit plan, the state has to make that plan whole, so when people retire, they know they're going to get that money. It's already a pledge that's been made. So we have a deficit in that PERS fund right now of about $1.4 billion. I think it's much less because the markets have done well this year. I haven't seen the numbers, but it was at $1.4 billion. So we put a bucket in there to try and get $65 million in to make that retirement whole over time. And by doing this, instead of that fund going into a negative in the next 50 years, it is now on track to get up to 100% funding over time just by doing this incrementally. So that fixes that. The other part about it is for counties and cities that are in the PERS plan, so political subdivisions, the increased costs to make your employees whole is all being paid by the state. So the state's filling that gap and so far have not come back to the political subdivisions and taken that. Again, to me, another property tax issue. You don't have to tax for it. Strategic Investment Fund, the $400 million, that was set up, I think, back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And the history is quite extensive on this. We used to have what was called the Permanent Oil and Gas Tax Trust Fund, but every legislative session, it was never permanent. They would just spend the money. So they decided to change the name of it to the Strategic Investment Fund. SIF. Strategic Investment and Infrastructure Fund. And that fund gets funded by oil money, and this is the bucket that it gets $400 million. So this is we call it General Fund 2. When we have difficulty balancing the budget with the $460 million we get in the general fund, we go down to SIF and say we need to take some SIF dollars to plug holes and balance the budget when we leave. So SIF is sometimes called General Fund 2. My take on that is I've tried to get legislation passed that eliminates the SIF fund and just says, look, if we're going to spend $860 million for the general fund to balance the budget, let's just put $860 million into the general fund, and everybody knows it's transparent. This is how much oil money we're spending to balance our budgets. But so far, I've been unsuccessful in that. It just, to me, it makes it easier. You have this extra bucket that just confuses people. So trying to make it easier to understand. The non-oil cities next, you've heard about Operation Prairie Dog. So the non-oil and gas counties in the state, about 4 years ago, with Senator Rich Wardner, Majority Leader of the Senate out of Dickinson, came up with a plan that, well, if the oil counties get this $600 or $700 or $800 million of biennium, we should get something too. And I kept saying, no, we're dealing with the impacts, not you. Well, we should get something too. And it all comes down to the political aspect of votes. At the time, we had, of the 47 legislative districts in the state, there were 28 in the east and 19 in the west. So you know what calculation you can do out of that. Now, because of redistricting and population growth, there's 24 east and 23 west. And the projections are, at the next census, the number of west districts is going to outnumber the number of east districts. So I think we're getting to a position where we have some power to do some things better. But the Operation Prairie Dog grants $115 million per biennium if this bucket fills. The first year we instituted this, the bucket never filled. They got nothing. Last biennium, they got their money, and this biennium, they'll get it too. But Prairie Dog gives them a $115 million allocation only for infrastructure. They can only spend it on infrastructure, water, roads, street projects. They can't spend it anywhere else for operations or anything. It's infrastructure. Non-oil counties and townships are going to get $115 million. And airports, I put an extra allocation on there, an amendment for $20 million for airports, because North Dakota's airports have gotten significantly more federal funds in the last 8 years because we provide the Airport Commission, this $20 million is grant available money to match federal grants. So when federal grants are available and they don't always fit the schedule of the legislature, the Airport Commission can go in and say, the feds are giving us 90% money, we're going to get 10% out of this, and we're going to do more projects for airports. So they were significantly helpful in our airport and even the small non-commercial airports. And then this SIF 2 bucket is the last bucket to fill in this chain of buckets. So again, fill down. And if we don't have enough money, they just don't keep filling. The SIF bucket is projected at the end to get an extra $54 million. It'll be more than that, I think, based on oil price and production. But as you can see, about 33% or 1.479 million is the large buckets for distribution. So we call this the gross production tax distribution formula. So money hits the state, but a lot of it goes back to political subdivisions too. Okay, next slide. So summary, so constitutional funds get about $2.2 billion. This is of their $5.14 billion in the general fund, and we'll get into why that's important. Constitutional funds get $2.2 billion. Large buckets get $1.5 billion. Small buckets, 77. In lieu of property taxes, 682. That's our gross production monies to states, counties, and schools out west. Tribal share, $670 million. That goes to one tribe, the MHA Nation. They are about 25 to 30% of the production in North Dakota at any given time. Right now, they're actually about $100 million under that forecast because federal land and federal regulations are not allowing pipelines to go in, which is restricting activity, and they're not allowing federal leases to be sold, which means if you have a 1,280 acre spacing unit in the Bakken, and there's even one federal mineral acre in there that they're not allowing to be leased, you can't drill that whole 1,280. So 1,279 acres privately held can't be drilled because of that one federal acre. And that's happening in the Fort Berthold Reservation right now. Next slide, please. Here's our current biennium budget. Again, oil prices fluctuate. That last one I think is important. A handful of counties will be responsible for filling $1 billion plus gap for the entire state. The second one, to fund the proposed measure to eliminate property tax, the price of oil, if we didn't have any other sources of revenue and we relied on oil to do this, the price of oil would have to average $100 per barrel, and production would have to average 1.3 million barrels a day for 8 years until the legacy earnings fund would be large enough to take over the payment of the $3.15 billion required. And we know by the volatility that doesn't happen. We're hoping it happens over time. It's just not going to happen in the near future if the measure passes. So here's our slide of fund spending. General funds is 6.1 billion, special funds 7.3 billion, and federal funds 6.2. Our total budget this biennium is 19.6. Go to the next slide. So here's why that's important. Federal funds of 6.2 billion, we cannot use federal funds for property tax relief. Those funds have other dedicated purposes dedicated from the federal government, and they cannot be used for paying the measure. So we'd have 13.4 left of non-federal funds. Next slide. Of that 13.4 billion, assistance to political subdivisions, and that's not just the gross production tax. We also have a highway distribution fund that goes to cities, counties, and townships. We have park funds that go down to the park districts. We have library grant funds that go out. We have a state aid distribution formula, which based on the amount of sales tax the state takes in at the 5% level, there is a calculation that we share that money with political subdivisions. In Williston's case this year, we're going to get about $2.5 million just from state aid distribution. So that has to come out as well. So here it is, property tax reform. We're sending out $1.8 billion this biennium for property tax reform. Most of that is K-12 education formula funding. The $11,000 per pupil that the state pays, which is about roughly 75% of the cost to educate a child. Your local property taxes makes up the other 25%. By the way, in 2000, that number was 25% state, 75% local. So there's been a switch there. Water Resources Trust Fund, the water projects, we're going to spend $783 million this year, or this biennium, on those projects. Projects that like WAS, Western Area Water Supply, gets funding out of here. Northwest Rural Water gets money out of here. R&T out of Stanley gets money out of here. McKinsey Rural gets money out of here. Common Schools Trust Funds earnings. The Common Schools Trust Fund, which has a balance right now of about $6.9 billion, this biennium is contributing $510 million in interest earnings, investment earnings, to pay for the $11,000 per student, per pupil. So it's about 25% of our funding. Now, the more that Common Schools Trust Fund grows its balance, the higher this number gets. And at some point in time, you could see a point in time where the Common Schools Trust Fund could almost, on its own, fund public education per pupil costs in North Dakota. It would probably take decades, but you can see where we can get there if we don't destroy the Common Schools Trust Fund. In lieu of property tax to oil counties, that's our gross production, 682. State aid distribution is 243 million. And then the fuel taxes, we get a highway tax distribution, and that's 187 million. So at the bottom side just says, what would you cut? Because the Common Schools Trust Fund would never be used to pay property tax relief, except through the distributions that are occurring right now. That 510 million, I think, is property tax relief because it's taking what you used to pay from the local coffers and transferring it to the state for payment per pupil. The Resources Trust water projects cannot be used for property tax relief because that's a dedicated constitutional fund that has to be spent on water projects. Property tax reform, we're already sending that out the door. So we get down to this side of the slide. The in lieu of property tax, the 682 million, the 243 and 187, that's the numbers we're going to look at for helping pay property tax if the measure passes. And I say that because 3.15 is a big number. All of those monies, the state doesn't depend on them to run our budget. It's excess dollars we send out right now to political subdivisions. And what are you going to do first? You're going to fund state government first, and anything left over can go out the door. If there's nothing left over, that's probably not going to go out the door. And why that's important for Williston in particular is we levy about $5 million in property taxes right now for the city of Williston. The library gets a separate levy, and so does cemetery and something else. There's some smaller ones in there. But anyway, about $5 million right now that we get. So we'll get that $5 million if the measure passes. But if you take the money, go to the previous slide if you could, please. If you take the money from the 682 million we get and from the 243 and 187, if none of that's available because we're using that, diverting that to pay for the property tax measure, Williston loses in formula payments $36 million a year. So we get $5 million, but we lose 36. So that's going to mean either finding other ways to assess the public to pay for those services we're going to have to keep, or we're going to have to just eliminate services to the tune of about $36 million a year. So there is a trade-off. Go ahead. Assistance political subdivisions. This is that PERS insurance that we're paying for counties and cities, $120 million. Foundation aid stabilization, $157. Prairie dog is $230. Prairie dog, this one will definitely go away. $230 million, that'll go away. So the cities won't get their infrastructure payments, neither will the counties. The flex funding we just instituted this session. So the state, in statute, had a provision that state highway dollars could not be used on any system that's not a state highway. So think about that. County roads have to be paid by county money. Cities have to be paid by city money. No state dollars could go into those road projects. We established the flexible fund so that the state highway department, in knowing that they're doing a big project that was going to intertwine with a significant county road project, could now help assist that county road project with money from the flexible fund. So that's $42 million. That will go away. I just helped set up that fund last session. That'll go away. The insurance tax distribution for fire departments, that can't be touched. That's money that the insurance commissioner gets from the payments from the insurance companies, and he turns around and sends it right back to every fire department in North Dakota on a formula system so they can buy equipment and take care of their fire departments. K-12 per pupil CTE, transportation special ed, that's formula driven. That won't be touched in my mind. And emergency medical, child welfare, and law enforcement, again, public safety probably won't get touched either because that's too important. Again, these are all going to be priority discussions at the legislature. The policy committees will say, here's what you have to fund, and then the appropriations committees will say, once they've established the priorities, we'll fund as far down as we have money to do. Balance after Fact 2 is $7.9 billion, subtract tuition and fees, university system. So we can't use tuition and fee dollars to pay for property tax relief. So the total budget remaining when we go through all these calculations, and sorry it took so long to get here, but it's about $5.9 billion. Go ahead. Sorry, Paul, I told you I wasn't going to go through all these slides, but they're all important. Special funds cannot be used. We talked about this. So special funds of $0.9 billion. Amount left is $5 billion. So we have $5 billion left for the biennium, and that number, $2.5 billion for annual spending, actually goes down to $1.95 billion because of the new calculation of $3.15 billion for the measure passage. So actually a little under $2 billion left for annual spending. Next slide. So limited property tax to send $1.23 billion, or actually $1.5 billion per year to subdivisions for lost property tax. And so the number you can see is getting lower and lower all the time. We're going to have about less than $1.25 billion for the state to operate per year. That number, again, I said is going to be lower than that. So the point is, and I need to drive this home, is that in the best of circumstances where we're at right now, we could probably fund the property tax measure through cuts and increased revenue streams we're seeing coming in. But the point is it's probably not sustainable because we've seen fluctuations in our revenue streams over the years. The amount of money we got in the revenue stream from 2015, oops, sorry, I did that. From 2015 to 2017 in that 2-year period, our total revenue stream dropped over 35% in 2 years. So that's the sustainability issue we're talking about. If we have where we're at today and that continues, we could probably manage this over time. But if we run into any of those speed bumps, then we're going to be into a situation where the property tax payments will be made, but state government services will be severely restricted or cut. Next slide. Is that the last one? Oh. Okay, so here's some other things that have been talked about. Do we increase income and sales taxes? Every 1% increase in the sales tax generates about $400 million more in a biennium. I'm not in favor of that because I really think sales taxes are the hardest on the people that can least afford them. So I don't think that, I don't know where that's going to go, but you need to know that's in discussion. Income taxes. We've had 4 income tax rate reductions for individual income tax and 3 for commercial for commercial income taxes in the last 10 years. Today, because of those tax cuts, 70% of North Dakota filers have a $0 tax to North Dakota. So 70% of the people that have to file pay nothing in income tax. 30% do. I'll tell you that the 30% that are still paying income tax to North Dakota, the vast majority of those are out-of-state royalty owners that still have royalty mineral interests in North Dakota, and they're significant. So they're still paying taxes from out-of-state to North Dakota. So most people in North Dakota don't pay income tax. Most people don't want to increase the income tax because we worked hard to put it in a sustainable way where we can afford to take in less income tax. And we think that's better for business if you have lower income tax. Cut aid to political subdivisions, move it to the state. That's probably where the money's going to have to come from, to be honest with you. Again, you fund state government first, and the obvious thing is you just cut spending to everybody else. So that's going to have to be looked at. Spend the principal of the legacy fund. Right now, the constitutional measure allows the legislature to spend up to 15% of the legacy fund per session. So we could literally, at a $10 billion fund right now, next session, we could go in and take $1.5 billion out of that fund to help pay for the property tax measure. The problem is, as you start to cut into the principal of that fund, you get less investment over time, and it's never going to build to the amount that it needs to replace the oil tax revenue when the oil's actually no longer here producing anything. Again, the price of oil, we saw that in the stock market, must average 9.5% earnings annually. They have a target of, I believe, about 6% that they try to get in their investment strategy. And there's been years they've done better than that. There's been years when they've actually lost money. In 2019 and 2020, they went from $7.9 billion down to $6.9 billion in principal. So they lost $1 billion in that 1 year period. So that's not a guarantee either. Next slide. What about the large ending fund balances? So for the 19 to 21 biennium, we had $1.1 billion in the bank to start that biennium session. Most of that money was spent on what we call cost to continue. So because of inflation, because of cost to employee pay increases and all the things that we do at the state, most of that money was in order to continue the formulas for pay and increases in inflation costs. Most of that money was spent to take their what we call cost to continue, programs that continue. End of the 21-23 biennium, we had $1.2 billion, again, cost to continue. Our cost to continue in the next biennium, going to 25-27, is estimated to be just under $1.5 billion. So that's why we hope we have money in the bank to start the next session, because we want to make sure we're covering whatever we dedicated before in costs can be sustained and continued. COVID virus relief funds, we've spent all those. Those were all spent on one-time capital projects, either at the state or local level. American Rescue Plan, the same thing. We've dedicated those. A lot of that money, actually, the ARPA monies we call it, went to upgrading our communication systems statewide for our emergency personnel, police, fire, EMTs, ambulance, and Department of Emergency Services. And then the Fiscal Recovery Fund, again, those are infrastructure project dollars. So the only thing we took out of these monies from the federal government that went to something other than one-time capital purchases was we took about $800 million and put it into our job insurance, Job Service North Dakota, unemployment insurance. We put the money in there knowing that they were going to have large amounts of dollars going out to pay employees during the lockdowns of whenever the coronavirus was hitting. And we were one of the few states that did that. Because of that, the fund stayed solvent, and the premiums didn't have to go up when we came out of the coronavirus. So our employers, our businesses in the state, actually never saw an increase in their taxes for WSI, which I think was a real good thing, or unemployment, which is a good thing. The funding is no more. That's all been spent as one-time revenue. State assets, major state funds. So we have $20.6 billion in constitutional funds. Again, they cannot be used for property tax relief. They're over on the other side. $5.3 billion is retirement funds. You can't spend those. $1.6 billion is dedicated funds. About $500 million is appropriated, most of them dedicated. So there's about $131 million this biennium that could be used for property tax relief. Next slide. Okay, so here's what happens if it passes. This is just the reality. The first year, 2025, things will be relatively normal. Nobody will see a hiccup. We'll manage through it. The legislature will make the adjustments on the current spending to make that happen as directed by the public. The uniform system of taxing for each class will be gone, so we will have no longer have assessments. Oh, by the way, the tax relief committee that I was a guest at 2 weeks ago, the United States Tax Foundation came in, and by the way, the Tax Foundation is a think tank that is traditionally completely anti-tax in any form. So they're all about abolishing income taxes. But the fellow giving the presentation said that the property taxes have been around in the American system for 200 years. They're still around because nobody's found a more equitable way to fund governments at the local level than through the property tax system. So his take was, I would not get rid of your property tax system. Get rid of your income tax, but not your property tax system. It's the only tax that's actually controlled in its levies at the local level, which he thought was an important point to make. So that'll be gone. After the 2025 year, dealing with inflation, unexpected needs will be challenging, a shift from local control to state control. So the way the measure reads is we have to fund the property tax measure at 2024 levy amounts. It has nothing in there about increasing for inflation for years after that. It has nothing in there about sending more money out the door. That's what's mandated by the measure. So I could see a scenario where the state legislature says, here's the dollar amount. It's going to stay the same every year. We'll just send them the same amount. And then what you'll see happen is every city and every county and every park district, every school district will come to Bismarck before the legislature and say, I need more money and here's why. So the decisions will be made in Bismarck, not locally. I think the real sad part about that is that I think it's going to be detrimental to rural North Dakota. Fargo, Cass County has 33 legislators in that county. Divide County gets 3. So when those requests come in, who do you think is going to win that war? Fargo is going to get a lot more money in extra appropriations, and Grenora is going to get nothing, in my mind. I just see that as a reality. So it'll be a shift from local to state control. 16 to 20% of residential farmland properties are paid by people living outside of North Dakota. Again, you know, the grandparents that handed down land and people left the state. My grandfather's homestead, of the 12 grandchildren, I'm the only one that still lives in the state. Everybody else left in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They still get money from the farm in terms of oil royalties and farm rents, but they don't live here. Out-of-state property owners will not help with providing services anymore. They will be exempted from that because they're not paying property tax. I don't think this is that important. We all know what's happening nationally. One of the things that the rural interests have told us is out-of-state interests will now buy more farmland at inflated prices because they'll never have to pay a property tax. We'd be the only state in the country where you could buy farmland and never pay another dime for owning it. Out-of-state investments, Ted Turney, we know what he's been doing. So again, it's going to be a supply and demand issue. If you never have to pay for your property again after you own it, these out-of-state interests will probably pay more to buy it, which is going to make it harder for young farmers to start. Next one. Hathaway. Okay, so here's another one. BNSF will no longer pay property taxes in North Dakota. They're a company valued at $66 billion. They'll pay 0. But we'll have to maintain the roads for their systems, and they'll get no property tax. Go ahead. 37 to 40% of commercial property taxes are paid by out-of-state firms. These are the following that would get a tax relief that would pay no property tax in North Dakota if this passes. Walmart, McDonald's, BNSF Railroad, Cargill, Amazon, Wells Fargo, box stores, corporations, airlines, and pipelines. Now, some people have told me, well, if we don't have property taxes for these businesses, it'll attract more businesses. Well, I don't think BNSF's going to lay any more rail in North Dakota. I don't think Walmart's going to build any more Walmarts. There's only so much capacity to have a Walmart communities in North Dakota. So I'm not sure, at least these businesses might not expand, but maybe there's other ones that come in here because we don't have a property tax. That'll remain to be seen. I hope that would be true. Okay, here's the property tax within 3 years. It used to be 5 years. If you didn't pay your property taxes, the county could come in and enforce a foreclosure or tax sale on you. Now it's been 3 years. I don't know when that changed or why. I wasn't part of that rationale, but it has changed. So proponents think the property cannot be foreclosed on by the county if they do not pay their property taxes or fees. Century Code spells out clear that if you do not pay your property tax or special assessments, they can face foreclosure. So special assessments are also included in that, not just property taxes. How will it deal with inflation? Go ahead. Well, you got to buy new equipment once in a while. You got to maintain what you have. You have got to take care of wages. We've seen wages go up. They're going up faster now because of some of the environment with inflation, but anywhere from 3%, 4%, 5% per year, I think, is what we've been seeing. So one of the alternatives we're discussing at the legislature is we're going to have to give political subdivisions another mechanism to raise funds. If we lose all our gross production tax dollars, $35 million a year, we're going to have to do something to try and replace that. So they're talking about an election, putting in statute election language. So if the city of Williston said, well, we need to have $10 million more to plow your roads in the winter or build a road where you need it, will you grant us that in a tax option by a local vote? So that's one of the things that are being looked at. So the point is there'll be a lot of elections at some point, and you're going to have to charge fees. So park districts going to have to charge more for use of facilities. I can see school districts having to become, maybe you'll have to charge a fee for supplies. I don't know how this is going to work, but cities will have to charge a higher water rate. We'll have to charge a higher sewer rate. We'll have to charge a higher residential garbage rate to try and make up for this. I don't think we can charge enough to make up for $35 million, but we'd have to look at that. So you can beg the legislature, you can increase fees and water, sewer, institute a local sales tax, which small towns really can't make that happen. They don't have the commercial property tax base for commercial sales. Here's one that's talked about: institute a fee where property owners pay by the square foot or acres of property. There's a fellow out of West Fargo that's bringing a proposal that would institute a per square foot fee on your property, or a per square foot fee on your building or your residence. Institute an infrastructure fee, special assessments. We don't like those now. Public safety fee. We're lucky in Williams County we have the public safety sales tax, which helps tremendously. Inflationary increase tax. K-12 education. If your numbers stay static for what you're getting, then we'll go back into an inequity situation where rich districts will be able to find dollars elsewhere and you won't. So that's going to be a difficulty. Townships will probably have to go away at some point. I know they hate that discussion. North Dakota has over 6,000 townships. We are the most government-heavy state in the union because of townships. Every township is supposed to have three supervisors. Now, some of the townships are unorganized and the county takes care of them. I think about a third. So about 4,000 townships are organized and 2,000 are unincorporated. But they'll eventually have to consolidate or go away because they won't be able to fund themselves. Law enforcement is going to be an issue in ambulance districts. Ambulance districts and fire districts do not have taxing authority other than under the current system. So we're going to have to figure out something in statute to try and fund at the local level fire departments and ambulance services. Here's some interesting things. We cannot collect income tax or sales taxes for school districts. That's prohibited. In fact, we're one of the few states where local jurisdictions, counties and cities, cannot have income taxes as well. So that's prohibited. The uniformity of the system would end, and K-12 students would not have the same number of dollars educating them across the state. So that's going to be a difficulty. Homeroom charters have more ability to institute sales taxes, and they're going to have to be passed in cities to get to sales tax. Large cities have an advantage in that. Small communities will end up disadvantaged. After 2025, there will be inflation and other needs that arise, and services will have to decline in law enforcement, fire protection, public transportation, ambulance, and senior citizen programs. Townships will end up passing their responsibilities to the counties, putting more strain on you. Small towns will struggle. Counties will be forced to reorganize. Reorganizing counties, holy cow, talk about that. That's a big thing to talk about because that's been tried in the past and nobody likes that idea. And school districts will have challenges with expansion. So I don't know how you fund new school buildings because it prohibits GO bonds going forward. So I suppose the state will have to look at trying to do that for you. But then you have the inequity of the system where you're going to be paying a bond. Remember, you'll still get a tax statement on the GO bond that just passed. And I think the high school bond issue is still out there too. You'll still get a tax statement for that. But then we're going to build a new high school for Fargo because we have to fund it from the state. They don't have a GO bond issue. There's a real inequity there in my mind that has to be addressed. So after about 6 years, the people will ask the state to control the costs on special assessments, not allow certain fees, fund inflation of political operations, and the government will be further centralized in Bismarck. So, there are no U.S. states without property tax. This is something that the local people put in there. I don't have any control of that slide, so that's it. A lot of information. Sorry it took so long. I didn't expect it to take the whole hour, but this is a slide deck that was prepared for me by former Senator Rich Wardner, and I don't have any institutional ability to change to my own because that's what he gave me. So if there's any questions, did anything come in? Any questions? Okay. My website, or I don't have a website, but I have a legislative email address, and if you go onto the North Dakota legislative website, you can pick me out as a member. It has my cell phone number. Yes, I publish that. Anybody can use it, and it has my email address. So feel free to connect with me there if you have any questions from tonight's presentation or you want any further information. I'd be happy to give it to you. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know you headed to your meeting. Thank you so much, Senator Bekkedahl. And if you're not surprised, he has another meeting to get to. Very busy man. So thank you for taking time out. That was an excellent overview. The copy of the slideshow is available. Casey, could you put the PowerPoint back on the screen for me, please? And just to remind you, at this QR code, you can get it now. It will also be posted on the community meetings webpage tomorrow and will be put out through Parent Square, email, on the website, as well as Facebook. So I know that we have taken quite a bit of time in going through that. We don't expect to take a long time for Mr. Nick Lippert to go through just a quick run through of the new elementary school. A lot of it will be things you may already know. We just wanted to touch base on this because one of the important things about our meeting today is getting to talk with our school board members and our district administration and our presenter that we'll have left after the meeting. So if we have no further questions that come in during this, we will go ahead and close the presentations, but we will stick around so that you can visit with us. And this seems to be a conversation we can talk a little more about since we as school district staff cannot be weighing in on vote yes, vote no types of things like that. We're just presenting the information or having Senator Bekkedahl do so for us. So without further ado, Mr. Nick Lippert, I was going to rename you, is going to talk with us about the new elementary school. Please give him a welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Hard act to follow after Mr. Bekkedahl. He wealth of knowledge. We're lucky to have him. All right. So again, thank you again, Paula. We've give a quick update on the progress on the Williston Elementary School, yet to be named yet. But we are happy to report that we're on track and things are moving forward really well. So again, a quick overview of the process. Kicked the project off in April. Construction is scheduled to start, I believe they're starting to mobilize or intend to mobilize the first week of October. Looking to have a groundbreaking, jumped a slide, but groundbreaking on the 4th of Williston Square. And again, looking to have this project wrapped up the summer of 2026 to allow teacher and administration to get the project up and moving and be active in the building going forward. We've had a great leadership group composed of everybody from community members all the way up to district administration making decisions. So we've been able to spread the input from a wide variety of users all across the community, and it's been a really successful process going forward. Up on the top right, project budget as approved was $55 million. Again, remember 20 million of that was funded from the school district, so that was a $35 million ask to the community. Currently, as of the last board meeting, we are sitting at 53.9 million projected for the total construction of the project. Construction and all the soft costs for the entirety of the project. Of that 53.9, roughly 47.5 million of that is construction costs alone. So the rest of that is coming through furniture, equipment, design fees, and all the other things that go into technology, security, all those things that go into make a school successful. Next slide. We talked about the groundbreaking. We talked some logistics. I don't want to let the surprises out, but it's going to be a great event. Please turn out if you can, October 4th at 5 o'clock. Hoping to have a good contingent of the community and really treating it as a celebration of the process, how we got here. The site itself, 16th and 33rd. So 16th is the new road that bisects the old airport. So right off the north end of 33rd, we've got the site or the building located central to the site. Main public pickup drop-off is happening along the south edge, and then up here we have a separate bus pickup drop-off area to allow for not only what we have for current busing needs, but future busing needs as well. Wrapping around the north end, you can see in the darker green, that's the playground areas. So we have 2 separate playground areas, which is typical for a building this large of 600 students. And also some paved play areas that also doubles as fire truck access for the backside of the building. The first floor, well, you can see on the right as I'm talking through this, but the main program pieces that are happening in the building. The building is built of separate wings. So the wing going to the north on the page here is kindergarten and first grade. We have the second and third grade wing, and right above that we have the fourth and fifth grade wing. Central to the building we have our main cafeteria and full service kitchen. A 2-station gymnasium and administration wing right here. And as we step upstairs, you can see we have a second floor over top of majority of the building, but that kindergarten first grade wing does not have the second floor. So again, fourth and fifth grade wing. We have our a couple pre-K classrooms, main media center library, a STEAM classroom, music, and then of course a 2-story gym here as well. So again, making good efficient use. Construction is mainly precast construction, so making it efficient and something that we can also construct easily over the winters was really important as well. I made that quick.
And we do not have any questions, double check, that have come in. If there are questions or you want to see more about the project and the updates, things like that, we have that right on our website, and you can find it just by navigating to the home page. It's a banner in the menu, easy to find. And so let's see here. Well, I guess that's it for you, Nick.
Right.
Other than he's the man that answers your questions with regard to all those details. And I want to first thank you all very much for coming out today and taking the time and being a part of and engaging in our community meeting. We appreciate your attendance greatly. This is being recorded and it will be available to the public tomorrow so that the great information is not lost. And we have, if you can put that back up, I'm so sorry, Casey. We have another community meeting coming up. So we have quite a few here this fall, they all have a purpose, and we have a lot of great things going on. But we're in the boundary setting process, and our consultants will be here, RSP and Associates, and Dr. Jeff Schatz. We'll be here for a variety of activities regarding boundary setting, and those are the demographers and school planning consultants that we have. And so there will be another community meeting next Thursday, October 3rd. This one will be held, we have a lot of our places actually in use at that time for other things. So we have Missouri Ridge has a beautiful space for us to use out there, and that will be at 5:30 on the 3rd, and a very busy week because the next night at 5 is the groundbreaking at the new elementary school. So that concludes the presentation portion of our community meeting, and we will be hanging around to talk with all of you, ask any questions you want, or give us any feedback. Make sure to shake a hand of a school board member. We're glad that you're here tonight and have partnered with district administration to host this event. Thank you all.